My name's Mandy. Welcome to my talk. Today I'll be talking about the Student Cupola Project that we worked on for probably the last 6 months. And it took us to Birmingham, Alabama, where we competed against 6 other student teams at the National Conference on Contemporary Cast Iron Art and Practices, for short, NCCCIAP. And we also received some awards from that conference. That award actually is the School Spirit Award, another one of the awards that our team was awarded. The Erik Johnson Award was more of like an honor, so I didn't get an actual physical thing. But this discussion is going to be told from my perspective, so it may not reflect some of the other experiences from my teammates. So my name's Mandy Bass, and I am a student at Appalachian State University. I'm currently doing a double major. I am doing my B.F.A. in studio art with a emphasis in sculpture, as well as my B.A. in art and visual culture, and that is concentration in art management with a minor in nonprofit organizations. I also founded the Sculpture Club, which we use to kind of gateway into our project, and was the president of that, or still am. So I have had an opportunity to study at App doing a lot of fabrication. Here are a couple of sculptures that I have done. They are just welded steel. The one on the left is steel and glass, incension flux, while the one on the right is mined over tension, and that one is just steel with some enamel and spray paint. And then I've also had the luxury of learning some small metal smithing as well, which has improved my precision in fabrication and also my ideation process. In addition to that, I've become mostly interested in casting metal. I have had the opportunity to work at a smaller scale. Here is a jewelry line that I had produced for a small metal casting class using silver and bronze. A lot of my work is often influenced by the trails here in Appalachian. The pieces are either from running cedar or lichen, or kind of replicate the lion's mane mushroom. But I've also had the opportunity to cast a little bit larger scale. This, I've been working on a toy gun series. It kind of speaks to the toy gun culture that I feel is kind of becoming obsolete. They used to be used as learning tools, but now today in American society, no longer very necessary. This first gun, toy gun number 1, Absurd, is aluminum casting on olive wood. Second gun here, gun number 2, is called Obsolete, which I brought with me. That one was my first iron casting. It also has walnut wood and bronze plated decorative feet. And then the third gun here is called Reimagine. It's a bronze casting with a found iron or steel object. We haven't decided what exactly it is, but it is kind of meant to alternate the conversation and have the viewer thinking about what tools are useful for us to teach our children with, and gardening may be one of them. I also do have this sculpture here. It is called In Her Image. It is an iteration sculpture. It's kind of a self-portrait of itself, but more of a non-figurative self-portrait, just as in life, as we change and grow and reinvent ourselves, as this sculpture has done the same. The one on the left is the first iteration, which is cast iron, and the interior is cast with wax and pigments. It was supposed to give a kind of stained glass effect. That effect was not as translucent as I had hoped, and it also took away those wonderful voids that I had worked so hard to create. So I made an iteration and took out all the wax and lined the interior with gold leaf, but there are still the remnants of the wax. It's kind of the remnants of like our past experiences that we carry through with us, even though we grow and learn from them. Who here knows what a cupola is? All right. So I had no idea when I started this project what a cupola was. A cupola or cupola furnace is used in foundry practices for melting iron. It can also be used to melt other materials, other metal materials, but often iron is what we kind of I'm geared towards, at least. There's smaller processes for melting bronze or silver or copper. So the exterior is usually fabricated out of a steel metal jacket, while the interior is filled with a high heat refractory or refractory bricks. Ours is cast. I wish I could have brought my cupola with me, but it is very large and very heavy. So the refractory is meant to withstand the 2800 degrees Fahrenheit that is necessary to melt iron. And the cylindrical shape is usually indicative of a cupola. It can be made in other shapes, but the interior is usually still at that cylinder. You have a well where molten iron is collected. There's the wind belt and the tuyeres where air is evenly distributed into the furnace. The stack of the furnace is where the iron scraps and metallurgical coke is introduced into the melting zone in alternate layers. The slag hole, where impurities floating at the top of the reserved molten iron can be extracted at this point prior to tapping. There is also the tap hole and the breast. This is the point where the molten iron is released once the well is filled to capacity. And then there is also a trap door where this is the exit point for the consumables to be extracted at the end of a pour, as well as any leftover iron remnants, which allows for multiple uses before the lining starts to lose its durability. And at that point, you would just recast the lining and you can continue to use the shell. So I could get into more specifics about the operations, the ratio of materials, the performance aspect, but there's a lot to discuss. Yes?
Can you explain what a pour is?
A pour?
Yeah.
An iron pour is just referred to whenever we extract the metal from the furnace. Where you can see on the right one where there's a ladle catching the molten iron. So it's just pouring into it. So we just call the whole performance a pour. Why did I decide to build a cupola? Well, it all started with the question, what's a cupola? So I was first introduced into iron casting March 2022, where I participated in my first iron pour at the Western Sculpture Center in Lenoir. And this was a really nice opportunity that came along when I took a casting class as part of my sculpture program at App. Luckily, that semester, Joe Bigley was my professor and for that session, and this is lucky because cast iron is not usually offered in the curriculum at App State. So because he was the teacher and he hosts iron pours often down in Lenoir, we were able to get to learn a little bit about that process. And it's at that first iron pour where I completely fell in love with the cast iron process. And it's not only the excitement of the molten iron, the roaring furnace, the fireworks that encompasses the whole thing. It's everything leading up to the pour, the labor-intensive breaking of the iron, creating the molds. And really, everyone in the iron community is really eager to share their knowledge and work together to do these iron pours, and it just can't be done by itself. And that's that community that really kind of drew me in amongst all those other things. For an iron pour, usually you're breaking hundreds to thousands of pounds of iron and the metallurgical coke, and you need a large team to operate the furnace. Like I said, it just can't be done alone, and this cupola project was no different. So with the upcoming conference coming up in September, I was looking into it, trying to convince myself to go, because it really wasn't the best idea. It was several states away, it was Easter weekend, and I didn't know how to build a cupola. But so I asked myself, why not? So after a quick Google search to figure out what a cupola was, I was like, oh, it's an iron furnace. I can totally do that. So I sent a message to my good friend, Emma Hanley, gave her the open call for the cupola contest and asked her, do you think this is insane? And she said, yes, that would be insane. We should do it. So though Emma Rose did not stay on for the entire project, it was her encouragement and her enthusiasm that really, started this project with vigorous momentum and kept it going throughout the entire thing. So together, Emma Rose and I built a team of students who are willing to take part in this endeavor, knowing full well that it was going to be hard work and a long road ahead. And they were excited about this ambitious project. So I'm lucky to have had such a great team that trusted me to lead them in this endeavor. Here is the Appalachian State University Sculpture Club pour team. We call ourselves Pour Horse. So this is us at SLOS before our competition pour. As you can see, we're all very excited and ready to pour. So we did create an official club in October. We figured that this extra step would be necessary to get funding throughout this project. And we anticipated that we would need a lot. But since we were a new club, we were unable to receive any funding through the school because the rule is you have to be a club for at least one full semester before you can start utilizing those resources. So we had to get funding by other means. So from October to December, that's where we focused on funding the project. So we needed to get materials. We had costs for operational things for the furnace. We had conference fees, travel costs, other miscellaneous expenses. So we created a project proposal which outlined the project, introduced ourselves to the local community, talked a little about the conference and our needs. We also included some blueprints for the cupola design itself. So the budget cost for all those things we estimated to be about $3,000. I still have yet to go back to double check those numbers and see where we did actually lie. But it's definitely somewhere up near there. So we distributed the proposal to local businesses. Some of our biggest donors were Wilkes Metal Sales. They donated nearly all of the steel material that we needed for this project. Virginia Carolina Refractory, which donated all of our refractory that we needed for the cupola and our ladle, and Southern Distilling Company, who was our conference sponsor. They helped us get down to SLOS, paid for all of the students' conference fees, travel expenses, everything. So all of that was a great help. Other sponsors included the Western North Carolina Sculpture Center, Charlotte Pipe and Foundry, Clemens Welding and Machine Shop, Wallace Propane and Welding Supply, and Garney Construction. So because of these generous donations, we had everything we needed to get started, but we still needed a few more things, particularly items for our test pour that we were unable to cover through donations. So with that, I wrote a grant for those operational costs through the OSR office at App State and received the $500 that we needed to cover those testing costs for operation. That included things like silica sand, propane, our on-blast blower, metal buckets, fire clay, and high temperature tempered glass. So with all of our funding established, it was time to design the furnace. The design was created using various materials, including books, materials from other universities, consulting with our faculty sponsor, Joe Bigley. My main resource for this was Wayne Petraz's Hot Metal, a complete guide to metal casting and sculpture. And that's really kind of began as my main source for everything. And Bigley also utilized Petraz as a resource when he was unable to answer any questions that I had about anything because he wrote the book. I also used Stephen Chasten's iron melting furnace for the small foundry. This had a lot of calculations that I needed to acquire to design the dimensions of the cupola because it's very specific, the height to width ratio, even the things that we're putting into the cupola, those have their own formulas. So that was very helpful. So our furnace, lovingly named Lady Amos, was designed as a cupolette conversion. It had a 10-inch diameter. It was built in multiple sections, and which allowed it for a easier transportation, easier to clean, make repairs, prep, and having the conversion was a kind of nice touch to be able to run it in different ways. So a cupolette, which is not pictured here, is a shorter version of a cupola, but with a lid. So for an iron pour, you do need some head pressure. With the tall stack, it creates it on its own. When it's shorter, it needs that lid to help create that pressure. So once we had our design, we used the Rhino CAD program to kind of as a useful tool to visualize the construction of the cupola, as well as to quickly calculate measurements for fabrication. If you are into any sort of fabrication and three-dimensional design, I do highly recommend this program or any program like it because it definitely helps to streamline prototyping and ideation. So as a team, we began constructing the furnace in January. Our team began this project at various skill levels, and each played to their strengths, which was really vital to complete this project in the short amount of time that we had allotted ourselves. The goal was to complete the project by the first week of March, and we began construction in January. We needed to complete construction by March so that we had ample time to do a test pour and continue any preparations leading up to the conference. So to begin construction of the cupola, we did a lot of measuring, a lot of cutting, a lot of grinding. We first began by rolling our metal jackets, which the gauge was determined by the capability of the tools that we had in studio, which was 14 gauge, which is kind of pushing it for it, but really the metal jacket is just a vessel to hold that refractory. Then, we continued lots of grinding, lots of welding, more grinding. That's really all we did. All we did was grind. And we worked as a team of students solely in this solely student-led project to kind of figure out how to build a cupola and how to work together to get this done. And not only were we learning how to build and run a furnace, but we were also learning from each other and learning how to better ourselves for technical skills and had a really nice chance to work collaboratively. Our main welder for this project was Trinity Barger. He was an incredible asset to this team. He came to App with loads of welding experience. And in addition to doing a beautiful welding job for the entire project, he was willing to teach the other welders some technical skills to better us in our welding. Aiden Lorham, he was our furnace charger, or is our furnace charger, and he would come in and grind for days, bust iron, basically do anything we needed him to do. Isabella Dobbs, I like to think that I convinced her to come over to the sculpture side. She was a dance major. She's still majoring in dance, but also now sculpture. And she was really excited to join our team and would always come with loads of enthusiasm. Callum Conklin, anytime my brain would not work to do calculations, I would go to Callum and he would help me with it. He was a wizard with numbers. Zach Fowler, he kind of got tricked into pouring iron. We forced him to come down to an iron pour, and this is after we've already started the club. To force him to come down to an iron pour, and he fell in love immediately and wanted to join. So we were really excited to have him on our team. Maggie McKenzie, she was our main digital designer. She's the one who created those wonderful Rhino cam things, and she also designed a lot of our mold patterns that we did, and we also had a specific student link that we needed to have for the competition, and she also designed that using digital programs and CNC cutting and laser cutting. So it was really nice that she was able to bring that digital design into a very laborious practice. Caitlin Blackwell was amazing to work with. Anything you needed, they would get it done, whether it was constructing or welding or the cupola or more of the behind the scenes stuff like thank you letters to our donors or other organizational tasks that helped manage the team project. Deb Cartagena Rivera, she was our logo designer, our brand designer, if you will. She created the team logo. She created team T-shirts, banners. She was also the sculpture treasurer. So that's our team. So after 2 months of cutting and welding, grinding, measuring, reconfiguring, and figuring out how to build a cupola, we were ready to cast our lining in March. So it's not a very complicated process. At the interior, it just needs a pattern to kind of fill the void, and then we cast the refractory around it. So we built our furnace with a 16-inch diameter, which allowed us to fill a 3-inch wall of refractory that lined the interior of the metal jacket. And this is ample to protect the exterior lining so that it won't melt from the high intense heat. And so we did cast each section at the same time. As you can see at the bottom there's our furnace in its different sections. At the end of our very long casting day, it took us maybe 12 hours to do, and it's a process where it needs constant laborious attention the entire time. So everyone showed up and we worked and we got it done, and now we just had to wait a week before we can take it down to the sculpture center where we would start preparing for our pour. But before we did that, we still needed to cure the refractory a little bit further. So after a week, a lot of the moisture is drawn out, but there's still a lot of moisture left over. So to continue to drying it out, we light fires within the refractory, starting very small at first, so not to shock the lining, and then ramping up every hour or so until the entire furnace is engulfed in flames, as you can see here.
Is that wood sticking out of them?
Yeah. That's more towards the end of the process. So it does take several hours to complete, and but it's necessary because if there is moisture, then that high heat will cause cracking and it will deteriorate much quicker, and you don't want that. So the test pour took place during App State's spring break. The students worked constantly leading up to the pour. So they gave away their spring break to make molds and break iron and break coke and just get prepared for the entire thing. We wanted to replicate the competition pour as closely as we possibly could. So we broke 400 pounds of iron because that's what we were allotted for the pour. We configured teams of 6 to rotate in because that's the amount of team members that were allowed on the pour floor at one time. And then, and this test pour was really essential because not all of our members had poured iron yet. And most of us had only poured iron once. Myself had only poured 4 times before, and I had only started a year, like to the day, prior, not today, that day. So we had our test pour, and it went fairly well. Luckily, Joe had been guiding me to kind of learn the ins and outs of the furnace where I could at the couple of pours I was able to attend with him. He taught me how to lay the bed coke and the bed sand, how to manage the furnace to make sure it's running efficiently, and then how to manage a team. So we rotated members so that everyone would gain experience at all the different tasks that are necessary to complete an iron pour. I'll go through what those tasks specifically are further in my talk. But this test pour was also a really good opportunity to work out any kinks or unforeseen mishaps, and there were plenty. So our burn-in began probably at 1 o'clock. Burn-in and that's whenever we start to light the furnace to ignite the metallurgical coke that's inside to heat it up to that 2800 degrees. It usually takes about an hour, hour and a half. Ours took maybe 4 hours, and that's not usually typical. The torch that we're using, the pressure wasn't able to get high enough to get that heat introduced quickly. So once we felt that we were close, then we went on blast, which is when we introduce air into the furnace, forced air into the furnace, about 90 CFN or cubic feet per minute. And we did that just with a Lowe's leaf blower, which which those actually are much higher in the velocity of air that they give out. So we kind of got really technical with it and used some cardboard and some duct tape to cover the intake to lessen that airflow that was happening. But it didn't take long for us to get started once we introduced that forced air into the furnace, and we quickly were ready to start introducing the iron. So iron and metallurgical coke is introduced into the furnace, usually in layers that alternates. It is about like a 6-to-1 ratio. So for our furnace, we were doing about 36 pounds of iron to 6 pounds of the coke. I did bring some. It's down on the front there to kind of get an idea of what that looks like. Another problem that we did have is that I had miscalculated our well. I had forgot to accommodate for the 60% of metallurgical coke that fills up the interior. And so our first tap, we were getting not even 20 pounds of iron, which if you're pouring small molds, that's fine, but we wanted to be able to pour much more than that. So with this, we luckily Joe Bigley was able to be there to kind of assist us with this process and help us work through any things that
Silly question, but what function does the coke?
It keeps it hot, so it burns really hot, and then it burns for a long time. Metallurgical coke is just refined coal.
You use that to heat it up before you put the metal in.
Mm-hmm. And then to keep that heat consistent, that's why we layer it in the iron and coke layers.
Just those two things.
Mm-hmm. And a little bit of limestone to kind of act as a flux.
As a what?
A flux?
What does that
Flux.
To help the metal to flow better.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do you get the coke out of it when it all melts together? Burn off.
It's extracted through that trap door at the end of an iron pour, and it kind of burns.
Does it float on top or something? How do you...
The metal melts and drips in between the coke, and then fills in the well at the bottom.
Coke stays solid.
And the coke stays solid, and it does start to break down, and that's why we had to keep on introducing it to it. And those impurities that we're getting from the coke, or any sort of slag, which is kind of like glassy impurities that float to the top, we kind of pull that out of the slag hole in the back before tapping the furnace, so that we can kind of keep those things out of whatever sculptures or industrial things that we're trying to produce. So with only tapping about 20 pounds, Joe Bigley advised us to bot the slag hole so that we were able to fill past that capacity, because that hole, you can only fill it to so high because it'll just start coming out the other side. Botting is just a silica sand, fire clay, and sawdust mixture that's kind of just like a pottery kind of texture, and it's strong enough to withstand the force of the metal and the heat, but also weak enough for us to be able to bust through it with a steel tapping tool. So we did this, and because of Joe's iron knowledge, we were kind of tapping based off of time. I am not very experienced enough to even comprehend how to even do that. So luckily he was able to help us in that way so that we can start getting larger taps to be able to fill the molds that we had created for this iron pour. But overall, it was a really successful pour. The furnace ran really smoothly. We were really getting a lot of really nice iron. All the team members were able to kind of get some experience and feel out where they were comfortable on the pour floor. But there was one other thing that we did not realize, that you have to account for about 30% iron loss during an iron pour. So if you're going to pour 400 pounds of iron, you want to have 30% more than that, just to account for loss that you're losing out of the slag hole, and other various reasons. So mid-pour, we had to break more iron and make more charges. But now we know for the future that that's what it's necessary.
Can the iron just be recycled indefinitely?
Yes.
Oh, really?
Yes. I mean, once it gets really thick, then it becomes harder to melt, but an iron furnace that's 18 feet wide can probably take a whole bathtub.
Oh, wow.
I would imagine. I have seen a smaller furnace take like rotary, like the rotary pads that most people just kind of discard because they're just so thick. Yeah, like brake rotors, which I did not know you can do. Apparently you can. But we usually break it up small enough to, it has to do with the dimension of the furnace. So the iron that I brought today with me that's broken up in the buckets is for the sculpture pour down in Lenore this coming weekend. Ours, which is much smaller because our furnace was much smaller. So with our test pour out of the way, we had some time to make our revisions of our cupola, and we only had a couple of weeks to complete this because SLOS was coming up very quickly in April. So we had to chip out the furnace. We did this using cold chisels and some pneumatic tools as well. It was fairly easy. We made any repairs that we needed to the refractory, which really mostly happens due to chiseling, or if there was any thinner areas like in our breastplate where the iron's coming out. We also moved our slag hole up several inches to allow the well to fill to a higher capacity. We moved it up just below our wind belts. You don't want it any higher than that because that wind belt is crucial to introduce air into the furnace. And if any iron gets into it, then your furnace is done. So we did this by covering up the old slag hole, filling it with rammable refractory, which is just like a nice repair kind of refractory that can be added in between pours. And then we cut a hole with a hole saw and some masonry bits and created our new hole. And then we also made some adjustments to our table that the furnace sat on, so that we could more easily get to the trap door to be able to extract the materials after the iron pour. You want to get those out as soon as you're complete with an iron pour so that you can maintain that integrity of the lining. And then, sorry. And then we just had to make a couple more molds leading up to SLOS. I wanted to have more molds than we needed to because we were allotted that 400 pounds, and it was estimated about 35 of that was going to go to the designated competition molds. So we wanted to be able to continue to pour and run our furnace. But this time we only made 250 pounds worth of molds because we knew 400 was not the right way to go. Let's talk a little about the National Conference on Contemporary Cast Iron Art and Practices. So this is a biannual event. It has not been held for the last 4 years due to COVID, in person at least. They did do a digital conference 2 years ago, which I heard was very successful, but this is before I got into the iron world. The conference hosts professionals, artists, educators, students, and anyone interested in expanding their knowledge in the cast iron arts. And creating a network with other cast iron artists. There was presentations, panels, discussions, performances, workshops, and exhibitions that all focus on one major theme, iron. I did have both of these pieces that I brought with me get entered into the exhibitions that were being held at the conference, both a juror and a biannual event. Our team headed down in waves to the conference. Myself, Caitlin, and Maggie all traveled down the Monday before the conference so that we can attend an orientation and a meet and greet with the other students, cupola contestants, as well as start prepping for the pour. So the pour consisted of these specific outlines for the competition. Needed a 10-inch diameter for the cupola. This is measuring at the tweers. That's where that air is introduced within the wind belt, but can be made into any variation and does not have to be round. So there were some very interesting cupolas. We did not know what we were doing, so I just wanted to build a cupola that worked. And so we also had to be entirely built by students, no more than 6 team members on the pour floor at a time, but members can be rotated in. Our faculty sponsor did have to be present, but was not allowed to give us any advice, coaching, or even a look on what to do while we were in the competition pour, able to help us leading up to that otherwise. So the competition is meant to test the students' ability and for them to safely demonstrate their skills. We definitely were going up against some very knowledgeable students, some that had been pouring for years, some that were new at it. So it was really nice atmosphere to kind of get together with those other students for this competition.
What does the student link mean?
And then there was the competition molds, which were required by each team to pour. So there was the student link at the sauce furnaces. They've been doing this for maybe 35 years, where students create a link that is then linked together on a chain that kind of binds us. Yes, that kind of binds us together in the cast iron arts. And then we also had a fluidity test that kind of tested how the furnace ran. So if you had really nice fluid metal, you were able to get, it looked like a little maze. So it was able to get with all the way in the maze depending on how nicely your metal was flowing. And then there were production molds, which I did bring a sample of one of them, where it's stacks of molds on top of each other, and it goes down, fills the bottom one, and then goes up, fills the next one, goes up. And that's just a nice way to make a bunch of little small things very quickly. So we had all these things in motion for the competition. While we were preparing, we were making our charges, gathering Coke. We were also going to lectures, networking, making new friends, talking with old friends. And it was just a really enjoyable conference leading up. So the Student Cupola competition. So, like I had mentioned before, we were only allotted 6 team members on the floor at a time. And I would also mention that there are various tasks and roles that need to be accomplished while in order to run a furnace. So the jobs are as followed. You need somebody charging the furnace, which is putting the coke and the iron into the top of the furnace. You need somebody to hand those charges over to that person, especially if it's a tall furnace, which most of them will have a charging table, so it's not really effective to be going up and down. Then you need somebody to tap the hole to get the molten iron out once it's reached its capacity in the well. You need somebody to bot. That will be whenever we block that tap hole so that the furnace can continue to fill up with iron another time. I need somebody to skim, which is done after the iron is caught into the ladle. And this just removes any extra impurities off the top of the molten iron so that it's not getting into the molds that we're pouring. You need 2 people to pour. One person is kind of just being the dead end, helping the other person carry it around while the other one is actively pouring. You need somebody acting as what we call a safety shovel, which just helps to protect the molds, the people, from any splashing of iron. You also need a mold master, which kind of helps guide the people pouring the molds to the molds that need to be poured next. Often they're looking at the measurements that they're estimating that's in the ladle to determine which mold to pour next. You need someone to maintain the slag hole. This is where those impurities are coming out. It is I would kind of describe it as molassesy because it's just like this thick, gooey, basically glass that's coming out, and it does not flow very nicely. And you don't want that to block up your hole because then you can't tell where your well is filling to. And then you also need somebody to kind of maintain and run the furnace. They kind of just run around and make sure that everything's running efficiently, you're getting enough air and heat, and you kind of do this by looking into those tweer holes. That's why we had gotten our tempered glass, so it made it so that we can just peer into them without having to open those up.
How do you see? Or maybe do those visors help you see? Because it seems like it would just be like,
Yeah. Well, they protect you, and then you can see through them.
You can see.
Yes. You also have to wear safety glasses and all the safety gear. Completely covered in leather, head to toe, gloves, jacket, spats, which cover your metatarsal and your shins, as well as chaps. If you are running the furnace or you're maintaining the slag hole, then it gets very hot because you just have that hot metal air blowing in your face. So, we all kind of know to get fresh air over here and not there. So it can be very harsh on the lungs, and, you don't want one single person doing those particular jobs for too long. So usually people kind of rotate out. And, you also need to continue to hydrate because it's hot. So that's about 11 jobs, and we can only have 6 people on the floor, which makes it very difficult. I think they do this because the first, I don't remember who it was exactly, but when the cupola furnace was reintroduced to the artist world, because it kind of was a lost practice, their first team was 6. So I think that's kind of a tradition that they've continued on, and then it really tests the students to see if they have what it takes. So with those only 6 crew members, we kind of had to utilize efficiency and duel some of the rules out to optimize the rules. So our first pour team was Aiden. He's our charger. He's always our charger. Me and him both kind of learned together. Me learning how to manage the furnace and him learning how to charge. Callum was our slag and bot guy. I was tapping and skimming. Zach and Trinity were our first pour team, and then Caitlin was our mold master. But things did not go as planned. Oh no. So during the competition, we were unable to get the iron out of the furnace. So what had happened is that we had gotten a bridge in the tap hole, which just means that iron has solidified, blocking any exit route for the molten metal inside. So that means that we had to get an oxygen lance, pictured here, which is very exciting, but also terrifying. We had to get that. It's pressurized oxygen that's able to cut through thick metal, and the heat is just very concentrated. And so they needed to do that. That also did not go well. I don't know what was going on with their oxygen lance. But we were able to get metal out 3 times, so that was great. But we had a lot of problems that kind of contributed to this. We had another long burn-in process, and it was not because we did not have the pressure necessary like the last burn-in. It was mostly we had a torch that I was unfamiliar with using for the first time, and it had very high pressure, the opposite of what we needed, and that kind of gave us a few issues. When we first put it in, it had so much pressure that it blew up all the bed sand in the bottom, which is kind of to maintain this really smooth, very slight incline in which the metal kind of gathers and then gets extracted from. So it blew all that up, and I could see it in the wind belt coming out the slag hole, and I knew right away that things probably were not going to go well, just from my very little experience. And then we also had that long burn-in process because we were getting very hot pressure. We were getting good pressure. We had a hot flame. And since we had not done this very often, the pipe in which the flames coming out started to get red hot, and we figured that this was bad. So we turned down the heat, and once that happens, you want to turn up the heat. We don't want to worry about melting the pipe because you just want to get the coals hot. We also probably went on blast too early. The competition, we were kind of allotted to start our burn-in process at any time we wanted to, but we couldn't start introducing iron until 6 o'clock, no matter what. So as other teams were getting iron, some were finishing, and we're still waiting to burn in, we start getting a little antsy, and so we probably went on our blast with that forced air a little too quickly. And as soon as we did that, I could see the coals in the wind belt go cold. They, instead of being white hot is what you want, you can see patches of black, and I knew that also was not good. And then we may or may have not introduced iron too early. I can't know for sure because I was not the person in charge of charging the iron. But it's a good possibility. So our melt zone, because of all these issues, was a little bit higher than it needs to be. Usually it's kind of around the wind belt. It was above the wind belt. So because of that, we started getting bridges above the wind belt as well, blocking the iron from dripping down. But it was dripping enough to where we were able to tap that 3 times with the assistance of the lance. So the entirety of this chaos, I'm screaming inside, wishing I could communicate with somebody who knew what to do, but we couldn't, even though we were surrounded by experienced casters, and this was a really difficult pour. But that doesn't mean we didn't try our darndest. So, on our second attempt, we did have a little give in the bridge that was blocking the tap hole, so we took our tapping stick and a sledgehammer and we wailed on that thing. Team members kind of rotated. The crowd was starting to grow. We can hear people yelling, encouraging. That was kind of in and out. Team members were encouraging each other. Overall, everyone really kept a really level head and continued through, dedicated to this process without giving up, and we definitely needed that. So at this point, The crowd is roaring, and we're, tired, and we're wailing. Eventually, we had to get them to use the oxygen lamps again to get the second tap, which is fine. But we were still able to get that medal. By the third time, the crowd growing, the team members from the other pours had all finished. So there was no one else to watch but us. And so luckily some of the other students started yelling some advice, which was very helpful. One student yelled, "Bot the slag hole," which was an incredible advice, because that slag that's very molassesy that I was telling you about, this is the worst slag I've ever seen in my entire life. It was just nothing but molasses. It was terrible. And it's just dripping out, but the well's not filled. So we did that, so that alleviated a lot of that extra work that we did not need to do. We just needed to watch our tweers to make sure that that iron did not get above the wind belts. So once on that final tap, we saw the iron approaching the wind belts before it got to the tweers. We called out for the oxygen lamps, which was nowhere to be found. Eventually we got it, and we got that last pour of iron out, and it was very beautiful metal. It was nice, it was flowing, it was hot, it was fluid. We're able to get our production molds, competition molds, the links that all poured in this last pour. And if it wasn't for the director of the competition that ordered us to drop bottom, that's the term used for whenever you open that trap door to extract those consumables, I feel that we would have been able to continue on and tap it on our own from then on out. But, it was getting late, so they wanted us to go ahead and conclude. So it was no secret that our pour did not go well. At the end of a pour, as is custom for the artists to get together, have a couple beers, talk about the pour, congratulate each other, and this pour was no different. The groups gathered, and as we walked around congratulating each other, I took this opportunity to learn. So as I'm congratulating team members, they're giving me their advice on what they think went wrong, what they would have done in the moment, preliminaries. And I got this from every single team. I got this from experienced casters, from mentors, educators, and so that's what I utilized that gathering time for. Instead of having a beer, I was learning. I would say that I probably learned a year's worth of experience within that couple of hours. And, of course, we would have loved for our pour to go very smoothly, but it's through those challenges and that we were able to learn something instead of just walking away, high-fiving, which we still high-fived. It was awesome. But that's what I really love about the iron community, because they are, so eager to teach and give their wisdom and learn and, talk with you and help anyone better themselves. And this is really, why I love doing it. And it was such a wonderful experience. I wish I could do it again. But, because of my wonderful team who was calm and collected during all of the chaos, we were able to get through, and I definitely would do it again with them. So we were given the opportunity to pour again. Hooray! So it's our little redemption pour. We were able to do it the next day. When the opportunity was given to me the night before after the pour, I was a little hesitant because I didn't know how my team members felt about it. We had been working so hard for so long, and we had just had a very chaotic pour and tired, and so we decided that in the morning that we would decide then, but knew that the opportunity was there. When everyone arrived first thing in the morning, nobody said a word to each other. Everyone just got to work. It wasn't even discussed. We just all knew that we were going to do this redemption pour. So we were able to do it without any of the constraints of the competition. So we were able to invite our mentors, our faculty sponsor, Joe Bigley, as well as other App State faculty, Adam Adcock, Travis Donovan, Frankie Flood. We even had alumni Tony Deal, who joined us. He is a lecturer at Southern Illinois, Carbondale. And then we even had other students helping, there pictured on the right is a student from Colorado Mesa who was helping me to lay the bed coat, giving me advice on the best ways to do that. So really, is that, team and community effort that we were able to do it. And then it was just really fun to kind of be relaxed and have a good pour. It was a good opportunity to continue to learn, more about our furnace and have our mentors there to kind of help us continue to gain experience and learn. So our efforts did not go unrecognized. So the School Spirit Award, pictured there and there, was given to the team that acquired the most funding from either sponsors, their school, support from faculty, colleagues, instructors, and we really had ample amounts of that support, which was wonderful. So I just want to thank my sponsors, Western North Carolina Sculpture Center. They provided facilities and mold making resources. The Southern Distilling Company, which was our conference sponsors. Wilkes Metal with all the steel material. Virginia Refractory with their refractory. Charlotte Pipe and Foundry, which provided our metallurgical coke. Molish Propane and Welding, which donated abrasives for all that grinding and cutting. Varney Construction, which provided us a ample steel plate. And Clemens Welding and Machine Shop, which was kind of like a miscellaneous metals material, last day kind of thing. But they had been open to us throughout the entire process. And then also the OSR grant that I received throughout. Also, faculty sponsor Joe Bigley, he was such a vital asset to the project, from advising and consulting, providing an open line of communications. He, told us that we could text him at 3 a.m. in the morning, which we did not, but it was open to that. He also acquired that refractory donation for us and went and picked it up. So that was amazing. He provided us with the facility of Western North Carolina Sculpture Center, and then, he had been mentoring me and preparing me for this pour for the last year, really without me even asking. He just said, come on, I'm going to teach you how to do this. So also special thanks to our Appalachian State faculty, Adam Adcock, Travis Donovan, and Frankie Flood. Also, another special thanks to some of Western North Carolina Sculpture Center's either artists in residence, volunteers, and faculty, Matt Motts, Emma Finnan, and Amanda Zotz. Matt definitely was there with us prepping for our test pour for the week that we were down there, really advising us, and Emma and Amanda, just offering their advice and their support. Also, a special thanks to our other Sculpture Club members who did not make it through the entire project. Emma Rose Hanley, who really helped develop the Sculpture Club and get the project started. Chloe Von Cannon, who helped us helped us seek donations, and also Sam Hatchett, who helped get the club started as well. So I also had to thank my team members, but I think they know. Because I wouldn't be able to do without them in this insane endeavor. I thought I had a slide for them, so I apologize. But they stuck with me through the whole thing, even though I don't really think that they quite knew what they were getting themselves into. But luckily, they stuck with me through the entire thing. So because of all that support, I received the Erik Johnson Award. It is named after Erik Johnson, who was a respected Sloss Furnaces artist resident in the 90s. He was known for his dedication in the cast iron arts, as well as his encouragement and inspiring emerging cast iron artists. So this award was created to honor his work and his dedication and his life. The selected student honoree is someone who demonstrates hard work and enthusiasm for the cast iron process, embodying the spirit of the Sloss and inspiring others. And it was just such an honor to receive this award. It also came with its perks. It included conference scholarship, so I'll get to go to the same conference for free in 2 years. I'll be able to attend a metals workshop, which costs more than the conference itself. And then I'll also get a $250 materials honorarium, which I'll use all those wonderful things to create some hopefully spectacular work 2 years from now. And it it was not my intention to be recognized for any of this. It was just kind of a nice surprise. And I didn't take on this project with any of those goals to receive any recognition. But my intentions were to take on the challenging task of building a cupola, leading a team, researching the iron process for design and construction, and also continuing to educate myself and others in a medium that I had found so much passion in. So, by attending the conference, I was able to do just that. I expanded my network. I learned from so many others. I attended lectures. I talked with seasoned cast iron artists and made connections with academic professionals at potential grad schools for the future. So these awards were just a pleasant surprise, but it reinforced that importance of a strong support system. This project would have never been possible without the community behind us, the community behind me, the community that we curated with the Sculpture Club, and because it was intended just for that. So, it just reminds me that if you surround yourself with folks that share the same passion and enthusiasm as you do, you are able to easily do some pretty amazing things. Thank you.
What does Sloss stand for? What does that mean?
That was the last name of the gentleman who established it back in 18-something.
Really? That's a beautiful space
Yes,
where you did
yes.
all those iron pours.
Yeah, that was underneath the viaduct bridge.
Looks like it's under a bridge.
Yeah, it was a really cool space, and Sloss is really neat. Alabama, Birmingham itself is really unique because it's one of the few places in the world where you have iron and coal and limestone all converging in one area. Yes.
The pieces that are on the table in front, are any of those from your molds that you had at the competition?
So yes and no. So I've been working on this multiples piece where I'm casting these forms, and I'm just going to continue to do it over and over again until I have a very large amounts. So these were cast at both the test pour and the conference pour. These were from our test pour where we're trying to do a production mold. We only got 2 out of the 3. This is from the competition Sloss mold, the production mold that we had to do.
Yeah, we had to do bars, and I think some of the teams had different ones. We had bars and we had bottle openers.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So, and you said that it fills up from the bottom, so is that in the mold vertically, or is it?
So it's set in the mold this way.
Okay.
So there's one area where the iron's being introduced, probably centrally here, and then it spreads out, and then once it reaches the ends, then it starts to fill, and then it goes up from there.
What are you gonna make out of those objects when you have enough of them?
It's something big.
Okay.
Yes. I just really like the form, and
Yeah.
so I just want to continue to make multiples of them.
And at the iron pour, people can make their own tile molds.
Yes, they are
right?
doing a tile workshop.
It's on the flyer right behind you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're doing a tile workshop from 2 to 6.
Yeah, Friday and Saturday.
yeah.
So you can make your own really cool thing.
How much does the cupola weigh?
Probably like 1,000 pounds.
And how did you get it to the competition?
We put it on a trailer. We actually did transport half of it in my Jeep Compass to the test site, and the other half in somebody else's truck.
So you put it together once?
And then you put it together once you get it on site. And by doing it in the different halves, usually you have to like use really long tongs to get the coke down at the bottom. But with it being half, I can just like reach down and touch it.
And then
It's
how'd
really
you get
nice.
it home?
Just on a trailer, brought it back.
Taken?
Yeah, you take it apart.
Do you
Yes.
have to seal the halves with a special clay or anything?
We use that same kind of bot mixture. We just exclude the sawdust for that mixture, and it just seals it really nicely.
Clay and sand, you said?
Sand and fire clay. Yes.
So it's not welded?
It's not welded, no. No. And really, and we have it so we are bolting it together, but you really don't have to because it's so heavy.
So you showed the mock-ups that you all designed in like AutoCAD, and then was the actual like fabrication of the metal, was that done on campus as well?
Yeah.
Wow, so is all that in the art department?
Yes, all in the art studio at Appalachian State University.
Fantastic.
Do you already know what
Hence
changes
the-
you're gonna make for 2 years from now to the?
I'm not going to do it because it'll be my senior year. I'll be getting ready for my show. I'll still go to the competition, but I probably won't participate in that unless I start now. But it was a lot of hard work, and I definitely overdid it myself. I took 18 credits that semester. 4 of those were studio classes, or 4 of those classes were studios, and so it was really, really difficult.
So you have to make a new cupola each competition?
You cannot use cupolas that have been used in a prior competition. But it does not say you can't use a cupola you already have. But it just can't have, it just has to be completely fabricated by students.
Where's the cupola now?
It's down at the Sculpture Center. So they have several cupolas and cupolettes that are in their pour yard, and now we are placed amongst them. But we'll try to do maybe at least 2 pours a year using that cupola. I'll try to do one at least on App State's campus and kind of introduce that to the students in both the art department and the rest of the facilities. And then we have a pretty close relationship with UNC Greensboro, and we've been talking about kind of doing a dueling pour. They were also there at the competition, and we would like to kind of get together and do some pouring like that. Yeah.
Well, this is fascinating.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.